All right, so we're going to make our scenario a little more complicated here and introduce using if, elseif. And to do that, we're going to expand and add in the second potential power source, which is the battery. So we still have the same initial setup where if we have our sunlight of 300 watts per meter squared or greater, then we can determine and use the power from that solar power, and we determine it using that same equation. However, if the sunlight is not equal to or not above 300 watts per meter squared, we're going to try and use our battery power. However, the batteries can only be used if they're holding at least a 50% charge. So we're going to have to check that condition. So we'll have an else if the battery is greater than 0.5 and we have that battery power. The batteries always supply a constant power supply of 400 watts. So let's take a look at what the flow chart would look like. So we'll have still all of our initial setup. So the script we started is going to be a great start. We're just going to make some edits to it. We'll set our constants. We'll ask for the input of sunlight, add an input for battery power, and then come to our if statements. The first thing we'll do is check if the sunlight's greater than 300. If it's true, then the power is going to be calculated with our same equation. And remember that as soon as MATLAB sees a condition that is true in an if statement, it's going to ignore the rest of the possibilities. So the power will be set to the efficiency times the area times the sunlight. But if the sunlight is less than or equal to 300, MATLAB's going to check the next condition. So the next thing I'm going to do is see if the battery has more than a 50% charge. If that's true, then my power will be set to that constant of 400. If that's not true, then there's going to be no power. And so we'll see how we can deal with that in MATLAB. So let's move back to MATLAB. Again, we'll start with our same script and just edit it to add in this extra condition. Okay, so we're back in our MATLAB script, and we're just going to make edits to this script to add in that condition for checking the battery. So right now we check if the sunlight's greater than 300. If it is, which used to say solar panel power, we'll calculate that solar power. But we just are interested in determining the power. We don't any more, it's just power. It's not solar power or battery power. We're just going to call it power. So if that sunlight's greater than 300, then our power is coming from the sunlight, and it will be equal to the efficiency times the area times the sunlight. But if that is not true, then we need to check another condition. So we need an else if. And here we're going to check the battery and see if it's greater than 0.5. That means up here, we need to ask the user, what is the current battery storage? Okay, and if that's true, we'll set the power to 400. So now instead of displaying the solar power is, we're just going to say the power is, and we'll call that power. All right, so let's run this first, see how we're doing, and then I'm going to make some subtle changes as well. So the sunlight reading, let's still call that 400. Battery storage, let's say it's 65%, and I get my power is 504 watts. But let's say my sunlight reading is 250 and my battery storage is 0.65. Now I get the power is 400 watts. So it seems to be working, but let's just make a slight adjustment here and add a way to display what type of power. So I'm going to say here that my power source here is solar power. So I'm setting a new variable and I'm giving it text as it's holding text. So if I'm in this first condition, then it's solar power. But over here, in the second one, now I'm running on battery power. I'm going to add a display here and say what the power source is. The power source is, forgot my quotes. There we go. And I'm going to write my power source. It's text, so I don't need that num to string there. And this should tell us what the power source is. We'll put that there. All right, so let's run this. We'll try our sunlight one, 400, 6.5. So now we can see the power source is solar power, and it's 504 watts. We could make this all in one line, this display, but we'll keep it like this. Let's just check and make sure that if I have a sunlight too low, that we get that it is battery power. Okay, but what happens if neither of those are available? So let's say 250 and 0.35. So this is not a great day. All right, so similar to last time, we're going to get this error. So of course, we can say else power is 0. And we can say my power source is no power. This is going to work. So if my sunlight reading again is 250 and the current battery storage is 0.35, then it says the power source is no power and the power is 0 watts. We could do this another way though, and I just want to show you how that is. So if I set my initial or sort of default conditions up here, let's say I'm saying that my default conditions are that the power is 0 and the power source is no power, then I can take away this last else statement and it will just only calculate power for sunlight or battery if the conditions are true. But if they're both false, this default will stay. So again, let's just check, make sure I didn't mess it up. So I'll start with 400 and 0.65, that worked. What about 250 and 0.65? We got that it's running on battery power, but if I say 250 and 0.35, then there's no power. So either of those situations work. All right, so we can add many more different else ifs into this. You do not have to have an else when you have else if. It doesn't need to be sort of the catch-all, but there can be. And yeah, you can have multiple conditions. The next section is going to be a little mini project for you to try on your own and then see how I accomplish it in MATLAB. So I hope you've been following along because this script is going to help you start the mini project. So I'll see you when it's time for the mini project.